So for the last part of this animation, I'm going to add the Lego logo into the brick wall on the back. So if I jump into Illustrator here, I've got the Lego logo. So I just found this online. This was free. And what's important, I'm going to take this 2D graphic from Illustrator and I'm going to put it in, make it 3D in Cinema 4D. What I need to do is make sure that each of the paths in Illustrator are in their own layer. This is really important. If they're not in their own layer, then they won't work properly in Cinema 4D. So let's jump into Cinema 4D. Now there's a new vector import object in Cinema 4D R25. If we go to the Create menu and go to Generators, here it is here, Vector Import. There's a super easy way to actually make that work though. And what I'm going to do is grab my Finder. Here's the Illustrator file, Lego Layers. All I need to do is drag and drop it into the interface. I'm not going to change anything here. I'm just going to hit OK. And there is my Lego logo there. It's opened it in a new scene. And it's already extruded it. And that's pretty amazing. Now, I'm not going to need all of these parts. There's a square white background that I don't want. And this little black circle, that's a little registered trademark symbol. I don't need that either. But what I've got is this Illustrator file. If I select it here and go to its attributes, we've got a couple of settings for this vector import that's been created. If I click and drag the layer offset, that just shifts all my 3D layers in space. Path spread, if I adjust this, it actually pushes all the 3D elements apart, all these different graphics that were in different layers. So we can separate those out. I'm not going to do that just yet, so I'll undo that. If that'll let me undo. Nope, let me just set that back to 0. And extrude depth, that's how thick, obviously, the extrude is. Now, I don't want to keep this all as one object, because when we bring in this logo, all it is just this one vector import object. I actually want to break it into all its elements so that I can manipulate those and put those into MoGraph objects. So what I need to do is to make this vector import object editable. So there's a couple of ways to do that. Select it. You can click this Make Editable button. You can also just hit C on the keyboard. And what we'll see now is we've got our Lego logo. It's now a group. If I open that up, there's a null inside it. There's the Lego group inside that. And then what we've got is all the individual paths or splines from Illustrator, and each of those is inside its own extrude object. And an extrude takes a spline and makes it into 3D. So what I can do now is I can start to clean this up. So I don't need this white square. If I click on that, that's the spline and extrude here. So I'm just going to grab this one and hit delete. Now if I click here on this object, this little black circle here, I don't need that one. Let's just delete that. There's a couple of these. Let's delete that. There's a little R. Let's delete that. And there's a dot in the middle of it. Let's get rid of that. So that leaves me just with the Lego logo, and it's 3 different colored outlines, and they're all as separate extrudes. So that's really handy. So let's figure out which bit is which and start to name them. So that bit there, that's the red outline. So I'm just going to call that red. So let's go double click red. This one here that's the yellow outline. So let's call that yellow. This one here is the black outline. Let's call that one black. And this will leave me with 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the, which one's that? That's the E. That was the L. I think it was a bit hard to see, yes. So this will be L, E, G, and O. Great, so these are all my pieces of my logo named, so I can access them easily and know which one's which. Now one thing you'll notice as well is that when I click on each of these extrudes with its spline in it, we can see that the axis or the anchor point is way off the side somewhere. And that's kind of a little bit annoying. That's going to give me problems later on. What's happening here is that if we look at the red outline, for example, if I open this up, here's the spline itself. Its axis is down here. Here's the red outline. Its axis is out there as well. This is a really common thing that happens when you bring in files from Illustrator. What's actually going on here? If I jump back into Illustrator for a second, all these graphics here, if you click on them and look in their properties, you'll notice that the X and Y position is not 0. It's the X and Y position is measured actually from the top left-hand corner in Illustrator and positions objects on the page in Illustrator according to these values here. So one trick that you can do, now this doesn't always work but sometimes does, if you select all the elements in your scene and set the X, Y values to 0, your graphics will jump up to the top left-hand corner here. If you save that, quite often when you import this into Cinema 4D, that will actually all appear at the proper place in the center of the XYZ scene in Cinema 4D, and you won't get this issue. It doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. It's a bit finicky, but sometimes it works. I'm not going to do that here, but what I am going to do is another process where I can get my axes centered back onto my objects, because as I said, they're going to be a problem if they're off there. So let's start with this red outline. I'm going to select the red outline. I'm going to go to Tools, to Axis and Axis Center, and I'm going to make sure that Include Children is turned on, and Use All Objects, and Execute. And what you can see now is that the axis has jumped to the center of that geometry. So what I'm going to do is just quickly do this for the rest of these pieces. So there's the yellow section. Now this will remember this floating menu here. If I leave it open, it's going to remember my settings. So I can execute. So as I said, I've got Include Children and Use All Objects turned on. Let's grab that one, execute. Now I don't think you can do these in a group. I don't think you can select them all and hit this. I think you have to do them one at a time. I've tried doing them in a group before and it didn't quite work. So let's just go through those manually. And that's cleaned up all of those axis points now. As I said, if we don't do that, that's going to give us a real problem later on with our MoGraph tools. Okay, so one thing that's really handy here as well is that if we go to the Basic tab for each of these objects, we can see that they've actually been set the appropriate color from Illustrator. Now the annoying thing is, once we go into MoGraph and drop these into a fracture, it's going to overwrite these colors, so we'll have to remake them manually. But that's why I've renamed these things red, yellow, and black, so that I know which object is which and which ones to color them for when they go into our 3D scene. Now one thing I didn't do before I made this editable was I didn't change the thickness of my extrude. I planned to make that a little bit thicker, but I can worry about that a little bit later on. So anyway, this is all good. What I'm going to do now is just drag this Lego group out, because I don't need these leftover nulls and groups, and this is a lot tidier now. So what I want to do is put this into my other scene. So what I'm going to do is just select Lego here, hit Command C on my keyboard, jump back into my main scene that I've been working on here, and hit Command V, and the Lego logo appears here in my Object Manager. Now I'm just going to lock and tidy up my Object Manager here. Now for some reason that random color needs to be, that one wasn't in the right layer, so I've just adjusted that and just set it to the right layer. I'll go to my layers menu and I'm just going to lock the truck layer as well. So that means I can't accidentally select the stuff while I'm working on all the logo bits. The other thing I'm going to do is just hide these other two layers for a second. And here's my Lego logo, and one thing you'll notice is it is tiny. It's really, 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 really small. In fact, if I hit O on my keyboard, there it is, I can find it, but it is minuscule compared to everything else. This is also really common with Illustrator files. The scale can be out of whack. Now you can adjust that in the import dialog when you drag stuff in, or you can just grab this group with all the bits in it, go to its coordinates, and in its scale section, I'm just going to make this is 10 times bigger enough in the scale. Let's have a look. I might have to go much bigger than that. That still looks pretty small. I might have to go, say, let's try 50. Now I can, again, I can change this. Whoops, that's a little too big. I can change this later. I can change this in a whole number of ways, but I'm just going to set this group to be a little bit larger, and I'll fine tune it later on. Okay, so that's looking good. So let's get my layers back so I can see where it is. Let's grab this group and I'm going to position it on my wall, just in front of the wall, and up a little bit. Now this probably still needs to be a little bigger. Let's jump back into my camera and scrub through to the end of my timeline, and I want this up here, and let's just go back into the scale for that, and I want it probably almost twice as big, so let's try 100 scale for all of these. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. Let's just jump out of there for a second. And if I wanted to here, I could change the Z scale so that it's even bigger. And that should give us a bit more thickness to our letters there. Let's go a bit further than that again. Okay, so all I've done is just used the scale settings on this group, which will scale everything inside it. So let's jump back in my camera. That's looking pretty good. Okay, I'm happy with that. So let's get this set up now as a MoGraph object so that we can animate the appearance of this logo. So again, I'm going to use a fracture similar to what I did with the truck. So let's make a MoGraph fracture. Oops, not that one, sorry. Let's delete that. MoGraph fracture. There we go. Now I'm going to take all the pieces from the Lego logo, not that group itself, and drop them in the fracture. So let's shift select these, drag and drop them into the fracture. Now, as I said earlier, we're going to lose the colors, unfortunately, because the colors were all based on these individual pieces, and the fracture overrides that. So what I'm going to do is just quickly remake some of these colors. Now, the good thing is I've already got a yellow and a red, so I can put yellow on the yellow and the red on the red, and I needed a black. So let's just create a new material and set the color of this one to black. Should be naming these as I go along, and let's put that on the black. There we go. Okay, so that's looking good. So the next thing to do now is get a plane effector going and get the animation for this logo sorted. Now I've already got bricks tumbling and falling and assembling. What I might just do for this logo is keep it really simple and just scale it into place. So what I'm going to do is hide those other two layers again while I animate this. And with my fracture selected, I'm going to go to MoGraph and make a plane effector. And you can see the logo's jumped up in the air a little bit. Let's go to its attributes, and in the parameters, I don't want to move it up. I actually don't want to move it at all. I'm going to turn off position. All I'm going to do is scale this logo. So let's hit scale, turn that on. Now, when this scales up into place, I want it to uniformly scale, so all axes at the same amount at the same time. So let's turn on uniform scale. And I'm going to set the scale down to -1, which will make it effectively shrink and disappear. So the plane effector is scaling it down. I'm going to make a field that scales it up and animates. So with my plane effector selected, I'm going to go to fields, and I'm going to make a linear field. Now what I'm going to do, if I drag this from side to side, as it drives through the logo, the letters appear, but the background sort of appears partway through. I don't really like that order. I'd really like sort of the outline bits to appear and then the letters. So I really need to, let's jump out of my camera, rather than have my plane effector in its field going sideways through this, I want to go from back to front so that it scales these back outlines first and then the letters. So with this field, I'm going to change its direction to Z. So now we're going to go backwards and forwards. And as you can see, as we come through, I've got this backwards because my letters are starting to scale up and then the outline afterwards. I actually want it the opposite direction so that as I drag it through, there we go, I've got my outline appears and then the letters appear in afterwards. Now I'm happy for that. I'm just going to keep this really simple. That will do just fine. Now what I'm going to do, because these don't have a lot of thickness between them, between the different elements, the letters and the outlines, I'm going to keep the thickness of this field quite narrow. So let's keep that in a lot narrower, and what we should see now is the background appear quicker and then the letters appear. That's what I wanted. So let's narrow that down even a little further. So now I've got the outlines appearing and then the letters. That's better, that's what I wanted. So this is because the objects in the fracture here are arranged from front to back. We've got outlines at the back, letters at the front. So I've set up my field to go in the same direction that these are arranged, and by making it really narrow, it just passes just through the outline bits at the back, then comes through to the letters at the front. So I can make that even a tiny bit narrower if I want. Brilliant. Okay, so the field is only moving a really small amount for this one, but that's good. I'm happy with that. It's all working well. So let's just look at my other layers to get my timing sorted. So let's turn these back on. So if I scrub through, there's my truck appearing around 100, 115, 125, it's all done. So probably about, maybe at 115, I'm going to start my animation for my logo. So at frame 115, I'm going to grab my linear field, I'm going to drag it all the way backwards so all that shrinks and disappears, and set a keyframe. I want this to pop out quite quickly, so let's go say to 130. That's just over half a second, and let's drag this forward until everything appears and set a keyframe. So now there's my logo appearing. Great, I'm happy with that. Let's just look through the camera and hit play and see what we get. Brick wall, truck, and the logo appears. The logo is pretty quick. Maybe I might make that a little slower. Just pause. So I've got my field selected so I can see it's still keyframes there. So I might just drag that out another 5 frames. The other thing I might do is add a little bit of secondary motion to that logo by adding a springy delay effector to it, so it kind of springs out a little bit. And let's see what that looks like. So let's go partway along here to where it's appearing. Let's grab that fracture, which is the logo, and we'll go to MoGraph, Effectors, and let's make a delay effector. So with my delay effector, let's go into its effector tab, and I'm going to make it a spring. And this will take whatever animation has happened so far and then add a springiness to it. So let's rewind and hit play. And it's all looking pretty good. And now I get this nice jiggly spring going on. It's a little odd because my letters sort of cut through the outline a little bit, so I might turn the strength of that down maybe to about halfway. That's slightly better. Let's go down a little further again. There we go. That's just got a nice little wee pop to it. Now looking at this as well, looking at the general timing, I think the truck could appear a little quicker. So let's just unlock my layers. Now the animation for the truck, it's all running on that plane effector that goes through the truck. Let's just clean this up a second. So here's my bricks cloner. Let's just name this so I know what's what. Cloner bricks. Here's my fracture, which is the truck. Let's just name this fracture truck. And here's the plane effector and its field. So here's the animation for the truck, going from frame 50 to 150. I'm going to start there a little earlier, so somewhere around maybe frame 35. So let's grab its keyframe, grab it to 35. So I've got my linear field selected, so that's why I can see its keyframes. So now that's still, let's go back a few more frames. And let's grab this keyframe and bring that forward a second. There we go, that's starting to come a little earlier. I might bring it in even further still. Let's go to frame 15, bring that to frame, bring that keyframe to frame 110. And there is the truck, and I want my logo to start somewhere around frame 80. So let's go to my plane effector from my logo, grab its field, and I'm going to shift its keyframe click and drag this keyframe. It's a bit tricky to grab sometimes. There we go. Let's grab frame. It's pretty quick actually. Let's go frame 85 to frame 100. And rewind and play. It's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, if I really want to tidy my scene up, the next thing to do will be to just select all these elements from my logo, right click and select the children as well to make sure all the elements inside here are selected. Go to my layers menu and right click that and add to new layer and just rename this logo. So that's all ready to go. I'm ready to animate that and render it all.